Welcome to the Citizen Mike Show. Thanks for tuning in. We do appreciate it. My name is Mike Brudzinski, and somewhere on that split screen is Republican Town Councilor Joe Marone.
Hello.
Joe, maybe the biggest story of the last 2 weeks, at least in my view, came out of the Board of Education. And
Yes.
on March 1, the instructional committee met, and Sal Menzo, as we will see in a 5-minute clip that we have, reminded the Board of Ed that, hanging fire is this concept of one combined high school that the Board of Ed would need to address. I tell you what, let's play that clip right off the top.
Okay.
And that'll get us into the conversation.
The big choice the board needs to make is ultimately, not tonight, but ultimately the one high school or the two high schools. There's a lot of concern, the fact that the guts of Lyman Hall, so to speak, the structures, the infrastructure is very, very old, and you're adding new to old, and it doesn't necessarily work out. I would like to have the board hear what is the feasibility of building a brand new high school on the Lyman Hall site, maintaining obviously the Ag Science Center, providing enough parking, enough fields, a new swimming pool in that building, and obviously new gymnasium, new auditorium, but really working on a new structure rather than adding new parts to an old building. And then the board would have a variety of options. You can stay with the two high schools if that's what you chose. You could go to the option that was originally presented, which was to add on to Lyman Hall, or to the new option would be to build a brand new building on the Lyman Hall site. After that, once you make the next decision, whatever it may be, then we would be in a position to go to the council to get approval to go to the more in-depth actual planning of a building project.
Can I assume then that a new building on a different site is off the table?
Unfortunately, Mr. Ross, I'm glad you mentioned that. I apologize I should have started with that. We did do an investigation with Mr. Ryan, who is working, obviously in economic development. We did look at a few sites, and there was one site that did have enough land, but the landowners have not returned our call. We're not, I don't believe that it's for any other reason that they're not interested in selling the land. And Mr. Ryan concurs with me on that. So we don't have another piece of land right now that has been identified in town. He's done a really thorough search of land that could be available.
The west side location was no good?
No.
What would happen with the existing building?
The idea is that if you would have to look at building a new structure that you can move the population over to in shifts. And as that happens, you knock down another part of the structure. We wouldn't keep any of the old building except the Ag Science Center. Yeah, we need that. We will need the land of, most likely the land of where the building is presently that would be knocked down for parking or for fields or for other things. So I guess the question for the board is, is it okay for me to continue to pursue what I'm pursuing? Or do you want me to press pause? If I go to the mayor, I think you still have to make a decision. You still haven't made a decision really to bring to him.
Menzo, do you want consensus to move forward?
Consensus to give me, to give me the continued permission, I guess, or permission to get a quote from the consulting firm to give the next study, to give us a quote on the next study. Then I would have to come back for you guys, you as a team, to obviously give me the approval to spend the money. So tonight is just to give them the permission to give us the update, give us what it's going to cost, the scope of the work. I bring that back, get consensus on you approving it, and then come back. They would come back to the either instructional operations to present their findings. So tonight, consensus to at least get the ball rolling. But again, you have to first decide if you want to combine high schools. If you want to keep both high schools, then you have a whole different scenario there. We're not going to rebuild both high schools.
I really think this is a thing that has to go to referendum, because we're talking about a lot of money, and it's a volatile subject. 2 high schools, 1 high school.
I think to everybody's point, it would go to the town council, they would decide. But you have to bring them one decision. You can't bring them a portfolio of ideas and let them choose. You have to, as Board of Education, make the decision that you stand behind. And I think, I've made it clear, I think the pandemic for me personally has solidified any doubt I've had about the 2 high school. I think the 1 high school really is what we need to investigate deeply and put in place. I really believe that. And I know that could be the kiss of death to my tenure in the district, like it was for another superintendent. But I personally feel that there's just so much. I mean, every day I talk to different curriculum people or both high school principals, and there's just a lot of, it's becoming more and more challenging running the 2 schools. It really, really is. Academically.
Joe, we're back. What do you take away from that? Before you start, that was about a 25-minute discussion that I boiled down into about 5 minutes. So obviously it was a collage of short clips.
Right. Sure. In an election year, no less.
Yeah. So
This is kind of like, the shot across the bow, I think. I guess my take is Dr. Menzo is very deliberate when he approaches this. So he's obviously put a lot of thought into this, and this is not something that he's just throwing out there. And it's funny because they kind of started down this path a few years ago and then backed off. And then we were looking at the high school renovation projects, and there was different plans, and then they kind of backed off of that. And now they're sort of coming with this plan. I think I'd like to hear, he says there's academic reasons why it should take place. And I guess I'd like to hear what those are, because we know it's going to be expensive, right? And then the other thing is, we know it's going to create a firestorm of controversy. I don't think this board, the people that have been on the board for a long time may be ready, but the people that haven't been on the board a long time need to be ready, because it's coming, and it's going to be a firestorm of controversy. So, it's funny, on the council we've had issues that have been controversial, and people say things in the paper and so on, but I have never felt the sort of public ire that I did when we did the restructuring of the elementary schools. And I just think that this is a big nut to crack.
Yeah. So I want to get your judgment on this, Joe, because it's coming towards you.
Mhm.
I don't know when, we don't know when, but it's coming in your direction. So let me get into that this way. First of all, are you running for re-election?
So I haven't really decided yet. I kind of want to look at the field and see, if I think I can still contribute.
Okay. I'm going to take that as a yes, but I want you to pretend no. I want you to pretend,
Okay.
for the purpose of this discussion, that you're free of all the pressures of running for re-election and free of the controversies that we know are going to follow.
Right.
And you're just trying to, your last term, your last few months on the council, do what's in your heart.
Mhm.
Are you open to a 1 high school concept on the Lyman Hall site?
I mean, so my brain says yes, my heart says no, is where I am. Because I've grown up in this town with 2 high schools, and I have a hard time separating myself from the concept of having 2 high schools. And it's not so, you could almost get to the point, if the population is going to continue to decline, you could get to the point where you could put everyone in one building without any major renovation. But I think that if you're going to accommodate everyone, plus all the programs in one building, you're going to need a massive building. So I think that's sort of the direction we're going down. So if you're going to need a massive building, then, could you enhance the 2 high schools we have? I think I trust Dr. Menzo, certainly with the academics. And so I think that he's probably onto something, but my heart says, is it really necessary to do this now and spend this kind of money now?
Yeah. I was struck by his directness in recommending, and that's what he did, a 1 high school,
Right. Sure.
1 high school concept. He was putting the prestige of his office behind it. I was very impressed with that.
Agree.
I don't think he said that lightly, and I bet there are some excellent academic reasons why there should be 1 high school, but what we don't have yet is a layman's explanation, example by example by example, as
Right.
to why it would be better, why the educational experience of the kids would be better with one larger high school. I have heard some examples in the past, but we need to hear more of it, more of them. And, you know, the price is going to be huge. I'm just guessing it's going to be over our share of it because there'll be reimbursements, but
Right.
I'm guessing our share of it will be the $100 million range.
I would think so, yeah.
What you would have though would be the Sheehan site maybe to sell off into a subdivision or something
Right.
to help mitigate that. But we need to hear more. And I think the way I speculate how this is going to work, they're going to come back to the council for an in-depth study, or possibly depending on what the board decides, you know, after a vote. It could be a divided vote, whether they
Right.
want one high school.
Sure.
But I think what Dr. Menzo was suggesting was that there'll be a time for an in-depth study, which could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Mhm.
And the Board of Ed would then come back for money from the council. Now and they would recommend, they would recommend one high school if they went that far. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, if they didn't want one high school, they wouldn't come to you
Right. Agree.
under Dr. Menzo's description. So here you are on the town council, the board comes to you with a plea for money for an expensive study for one high school. Are you going to be ready to deal with that?
You know, I guess I want to see what the flavor of the other counselors is. And here's the reason. It's going to be a tough sell either way. So I'm persuadable on this issue, but I can tell you that, you know, when you're looking at $100 million, there's going to be folks that aren't. The other thing is, I think some of my fellow counselors are going to be looking for savings and economies of scale and moving to one building. And I don't think you're really going to find much, if anything, in that regard, because you're really not going to be able to get rid of any people, because you're going to have the same, you know, there'll be little efficiencies here and there, but for the most part, you're teaching the same number of people. You know, you might eliminate one principal, but add an assistant principal, something along those lines. So I can't imagine that in terms of salary and benefits, you're going to save any money. So I think there's, you know, obviously you're going to have one set of sports teams, I would assume, which would cut your athletic budget in half, which is a fairly sizable. But, you know, if councils are looking for savings, I don't think they're going to find it. I think it's going to, if you're going to do it, it's going to have to be on the merits of the idea.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I'm open to the idea, and I think one high school that is extremely impressive in what it can deliver for the kids, and also on how it looks, can be an asset for the town. It'll be expensive, but I think there's an expense facing the town either way you go, whether it's renovating
Agree.
schools to new, or, you know, so I hope Dr. Menzo is able to make a great case academically for one high school. Now, let me just fast forward ahead a little bit. On the operations committee met, I think it was March 8th, and they authorized a small amount of money for a very preliminary feasibility study. The feasibility study was, I think, pretty much limited to the question of whether or not one combined high school could fit on the property where Lyman Hall now sits. So I didn't know what to make of that study. So I asked Autumn Allenson earlier today her take on that. And we got a short clip of our conversation. Let's watch that. So Autumn Allenson, on March 8th, the operations committee voted to approve a very modest expenditures, about $13,000, for a very preliminary feasibility study, not in depth, that's why I use the word preliminary, to see whether or not one combined high school would fit on the parcel of land where Lyman Hall High School now stands. And I think that was approved by a unanimous vote.
8-1.
8-1, that's right. Ray Ross was a no vote. What, if anything, should we infer from that vote with respect to the chances of a one high school solution, I'll call it, I guess?
I don't think it's time to infer anything, to be honest. I don't know the opinion of the whole board on one high school, but I do know that in order to get started with even having the conversations, we have to know if there's a parcel of land that's available to even consider that option before we continue down the path of one high school or renovating to new both high schools. You know, it's more of an exploratory to see, do we have it? Because we've looked for land within the town and there is none, as we've said on other Board of Ed meetings. There's none that we can identify that would be either willing to sell or would be large enough to accommodate what we would need. So this is basically simply an exploratory phase or an exploratory phase to see if it's even possible to do one high school.
Okay, so just to sort of wrap this up, if one were to infer that, well, it looks like the board is somewhat interested, maybe more interested than they're letting on in a one high school concept, they're drawing too much from that vote. Is that what you're saying?
I think so at this point. You know, individually, I'm sure we all have our opinions on whether or not we want one or two high schools, but I don't think anything can be inferred by just doing this very preliminary investigation.
There we go. Joe, before we move on to another topic, anything to add?
No, that's interesting though. So if I'm getting the dates right, that vote was just a couple of nights ago.
Yeah.
And so Dr. Menzo went on the record saying he wants the one high school concept before they've even done the study to see if it's feasible.
Well, they were very careful to point out that the feasibility study for $13,000, you're not going to get too much.
Right.
It's just whether or not there's a possibility that maybe there's enough land to fit one big high school with all the fields. And that would be subject to a more in-depth study with dimensions and boundary lines and wetlands marked out. You know, this is just a very tiny first step.
Right. I mean, maybe you don't stop there. Maybe you do one high school, and then maybe instead of having 8 elementary schools, you start to look at, what your needs really are in the future and really shake things up.
Yeah. Or just have everyone go online permanently and have distance learning. I think you and Chartel favor that. I
don't think so.
You don't think so? All right. So let's change the subject a bit. And you guys took up in executive session this lawsuit against the town of Wallingford.
Yes.
It's really against the mayor, really, but the named defendant is the town of Wallingford. It was reported on the front page of the Sunday paper in the Record Journal, which referred to the allegations, against the town as to what happened. And the story painted by the complaint, it paints a very egregious picture of sort of a strong arm management tactics by the mayor, directed at a woman in her 60s who had received over 19 years of her career with the town of Wallingford, some accommodations to her medical situation. Then COVID hits, and because of her pre-existing medical conditions, all this is coming from the complaint. None of this is my own research at all. But because of her pre-existing medical conditions and what I think I infer are some maybe some physical vulnerabilities, she's very much afraid of the COVID situation, wanted to work from home, could have worked from home. The town said, no, you're not doing it. She went to the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities, which is the process. That's a fair process to try to work this out. I believe while that was pending, the mayor called her in, sat her down, and why that has to happen, anyway, sat her down. She asked for a union rep, which was her right, as I understand the law. That was denied. And the mayor said, okay, no more accommodations. You're working 9 to 5. And that, I gather forced her to quit. And so she brought a lawsuit. The lawsuit is really brand new in legal terms. The return day, which is a a date that starts the clock running in legal terms,
Right.
was March 2nd,
Mhm.
like last week, or 2 weeks ago, and the case is settled already, which is a real tell, that this
Agree.
so quick.
Agree.
It was settled before the mayor's deposition would be taken,
Right.
or his assistant, who was a witness to this, could be taken, before the plaintiff's deposition could be taken, and the union rep. I mean, this was, let's get this out of the way, get it under the rug, hush it up, move things along, nothing to see here, folks. Am I
Well,
right or wrong?
So when you say it's a tell, see, I took it in the completely opposite direction.
Good.
So,
Yeah.
I work in claims, and when you have a claim and there's a suit and you make a quick offer and it's accepted right away, you know that there's probably not a lot of merit to the other side. So I think it could kind of cut both ways. I mean, it could either be that the town needs to hush it up, or it could be that there's really not a lot of merit to the suit, and it's the most expeditious way to get rid of it. So I don't know that you can learn anything. So when you said a tell, I actually took that in the completely opposite direction.
Okay. So I guess maybe the evidence as to how serious a suit is how much it settled for. So what did it settle for?
Well, we agreed on the settlement yesterday, and then the other party still has to sign off on the agreement. So I can't say, because that was all part of the executive session, but it will be a matter of the public record, once it's been agreed to on the other side.
Yeah. What's the timeline for that?
So they have, I don't remember the exact number of days, but they have a certain number of days to accept it, and then there's like a 7-day period by which it could be rejected after that. And so it should be like within a month.
By the end of March. So the way I laid out the facts based on the complaint, I guess you fundamentally disagree, because what I laid out was egregious conduct that if it ever gets to the jury,
Right.
a jury would be appalled and show the town absolutely no mercy.
Sure.
But what you saw, the facts you learned in secret, was a very weak, frivolous case bought by an employee that should settle for like under $10,000. Is that what you said?
No. What I'm saying is, when you're a lawyer, so when you write a complaint, you throw the kitchen sink at it, right? So I've never had a claim where they didn't have grievous injuries and life-changing issues with themselves. So I would say that you throw what you can in the complaint to see what's going to stick, right? And so you always pick a big number to put at the end. You never get a complaint for a small amount of money. It's always a large amount of money. In this case, it was, I can't remember I think it was 15,000 was what they were seeking in addition to some other damages.
Well, no, that's a technical number that has nothing to do with the real amount of the claim.
Okay.
That number would go into the complaint, even though you're looking for millions of dollars. So, well, let me ask you.
But I guess so the complaint is one side of the suit, right? And then the defense gets their day in court. So, so you really can't, you can get sort of the basic facts from the complaint, or at least what the allegation is, but that's really all you can learn.
Well, that's not fair. We're not going down your road there. If there's another side of the story, what is it?
Well, I can't tell you because we were in executive
Well,
session.
then there you go. You can't say. So
Right.
It doesn't look like there's another side of the story. You're making no comment. No one's going to offer a comment on behalf of the town, but sort of from the cheap seat, you're saying, well, there can't be too much to this. And I'm saying, oh, I bet there is. And your hands are tied, your lips are zipped. You can't dispute anything I say, right? Isn't that
Well,
true?
you're saying all I have is a complaint, right? And the complaint alleges all these egregious things, so they must be true because you can't refute them. And I'm saying that we talked about certain things in executive session because this is a pending litigation,
Okay.
and it'd be foolish for me to speak about them now and potentially prejudice the town's case.
Are you having fun with this discussion?
Yeah, I like this discussion.
All right. So
This is not my first time, watching the show, not my first time at the rodeo. So, I think for me, you have to admit that there's certain times when executive session is appropriate to have for the council. And, the FOI lays out certain items like lawsuits, for example, or contract negotiations. So, I guess the question is, does this fit into one of those FOI reasons to have an executive session? And I think in this case it does because there's a pending lawsuit.
no, in this case, it doesn't. Part of this could go in executive session. Most of it doesn't belong in executive session, but let's get into that a little bit. But
Sure.
before I do, I just want to change the subject slightly. Is there insurance covering this?
So I'm not sure if I can say that outside of executive session.
Well, I mean, a policy,
question was-
policy, that's not that shouldn't be a secret.
The town has general liability insurance to cover many things of this nature.
Okay, so that's a secret whether or not we have insurance. Is there a
No, I said the town
No, you
absolutely
could
has
say-
insurance.
You could say whether there's insurance. That's not strategy or negotiations. Is there a deductible if there is insurance? Do we know?
I don't know.
Yeah, okay. Do you know whether it was the town law department that is carrying the burden of negotiations?
So do I know? Yes, I do know, but I can't say outside of executive session.
Oh, even that's a secret.
It's not a secret, it's just privileged information. But again, it's all a matter of the public record at some point.
Okay. And so do you know whether or not there are any other employees similarly situated that were, kind of strong-armed to come back to work despite a reasonable fear of illness because of pre-existing medical conditions?
Yeah, so I've heard some anecdotal things about folks with concerns about the town hall and people not wearing masks, employees not wearing masks, and people outside of members of the public not wearing masks.
Yeah.
But I don't have any sort of official council correspondence. I only know, what I've been told.
Yeah. So if we had a town manager type of government,
Right.
and in that there are many forms of that, but the most common form is that the town council hires the town manager answers to the council,
Sure.
the town manager handles the day-to-day operations of the
Mhm.
town. There is room for a mayor, either, ceremonial mayor, but
Mhm.
or not. But if the town manager acted the way it is alleged Mayor Dickinson acted, and
Mhm.
frankly, there's really no dispute about that, I don't think, but let me just finish my comment.
Go ahead,
Because
Barry.
there's witnesses to this that the town didn't want to get mixed up in deposing or taking a sworn statement from. But if the town manager acted this way, what would Joe Marone, counselor, think about that?
Well, you'd have to look at the circumstances.
Tell me about the circumstances.
Well, no, I don't just, you managed people in the past. I believe you mentioned you managed lawyers. And so I think when you manage people, there's all kinds of allegations or the ways that, you could address a group with something and different people take it different ways. And I think that, whenever you're managing people, I think it becomes more complicated, right? Because it's not like you're dealing with a member of the public, you're dealing with an at-will employee. So if they don't like the working conditions, they always have the option to leave. Now, you can't treat people unfairly, but things like working hours are often dictated by union contract, right? So, if you have an issue with the working hours or the place you have to work, that's not always something that you can negotiate as an employee.
Let's get back to executive session, because it's no secret, my position has been over probably 20 years that the Wallingford Town Council consistently abuses executive session. The mayor and Chairman Cervoni very wrongly have a very expanded view of executive session, and you've adopted their expanded view, which I think is unfortunate, but that's your view. What is supposed to be behind closed doors is discussion about strategy. And I guess you're telling me for an hour, Joe Marone and the council talked about how to win this case and strategy. I mean, I won't believe you if you said that, but
Well, and in
apparently-
fairness, there were two items to talk about. So the whole hour wasn't devoted to this one topic, but continue, please.
yeah, okay. And the other is negotiations. And common sense tells me, unless you specifically tell me otherwise, this was already negotiated. The lawyers got together. There was a series of demands and offers and posturing, and they got boiled down to a number that was presented to you. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so the negotiations are over, and what's left for you to do is say yes or no. If
I don't agree that the negotiations are over, though.
Well, no, because that's what you've been told. But who's
Right.
hold on, and I will.
Okay, go ahead.
I promise, I will give you the. I will. So you say negotiations weren't over, which means the number was being actively discussed as if it was going to be modified. Is that your honest, truthful answer?
That is my honest, truthful answer.
That the number was going to be modified? You could have cut it down.
The council has the ability to
No, not the
increase or
ability.
decrease the number.
All right. I don't want to beat a dead horse here. We'll do that on another show. But I think it's, in my view, it's pretty disingenuous for anyone to say that you were there to learn about the case and to approve a number in view of what you learned. That has always been what's going on. And if that was the case on Tuesday night, there were no negotiations going on, even though theoretically you could have rejected the number. But that is not what was happening. Let me go back to what should be happening in executive session. Laying out the facts of the case as I did belongs in public. Asking questions about insurance belongs in public. Asking questions about other employees similarly situated or similar claims is public. So learning about the case, the statement of the case, Chairman Cervoni says you got to keep that secret, but that's not how it's supposed to work. That's how Mayor Dickinson likes it, and all 9 councilors like it, but that is not what the Act, the Freedom of Information Act says. I know you've adopted the culture of the Wallingford Town Council, which is when you describe the case, you always do that in private, but that doesn't reveal negotiations or strategy. That's a statement of the case. Your turn.
Okay, so let me push back on that a little bit. So, you know, what, as you know from the complaint, what's at play here is a particular employee, how they feel that they were treated. So anytime you're talking about how one employee was treated, you get into issues of how they were managed, their work behaviors, and so on and so forth. Their work behaviors and all that are absolutely privileged information, whether in the private sector or in the public sector, right? You can't get a teacher's evaluation and make that public record, nor could you take this person's evaluations or their attendance or anything like that and make that a matter of the public record. So I would say that it's negotiation, but the only way to learn about the elements of the case to really determine whether the settlement is fair is to talk about all these issues that the public can't have, that are not allowed to be in the public venue.
Let's talk about electric school buses. Unless you have more to say about this.
No, I'm all set.
All right. Because I'm going to take this up on another show. You may know that for 20 years I did primarily insurance defense work.
Mhm.
So when a claim comes in, I've had probably hundreds of cases of how to deal with them. And when in the normal course of handling a case before you pay anything, you take sworn statements and you do some investigation. And when you don't do it, it's probably driven by fear of what will come out.
So
Unless you tell me this was a very small settlement, I'm saying this settlement was driven by fear of what would happen if the truth came out.
okay,
And
and
that's
so
why it was settled as quickly as it was. You take the opposite view, I know you do.
well, you know, I mean,
We'll see.
yeah, I mean, my perspective as the insurance adjuster is sometimes when the offer comes, you know what it's going to cost to go to trial. You know what your depositions are going to cost. In my head, I'm doing the math to figure out what I think that a trial would cost. And you look at the offer, and if the offer is substantially less, the merits of the case are really irrelevant at that point, because I'm not going to spend the money to defend a case that's a loser, whether you win or whether you lose the case. You know, so even if you get a defense verdict at the end of the day, if you've spent X amount of dollars doing it, it's really not a win for the taxpayers.
Oh, brother. We'll see what the settlement is. We'll see what the settlement amount is. Electric school buses. So there's
Yes.
some confusion in town about the town's position about electric school buses. There was a story in the Record Journal, March 2nd, headlined "Electric School Bus Grant is Pursued." That headline is more untrue than true, because it seems to suggest that Wallingford is pursuing a grant.
Right.
And Wallingford is not
Right.
pursuing a grant. And then the lead sentence says, the school district wants to obtain an electric school bus through a state grant. And that's not true. Wallingford is not seeking to obtain any school buses. So we're off on the wrong track. And then you got to read many paragraphs down the story to sort of figure out that maybe Wallingford doesn't want to buy a school bus. I'm not sure. But let's get to what's really happening here. And we will not do this in executive session, you and I. We're going to do this
In public.
out in the
I
open.
like it.
We're
I
going to
like
do
it.
it out in the open because we trust the public and they have a right to know, you know? So our school bus, our school transportation provider is Durham School Bus. They have a larger corporate name, but let's call them Durham.
Right.
They have a fleet that is beginning to age. They've got to replace some buses. They know, as we know, that some other municipalities are getting electric school buses, but Durham doesn't have any in their fleet. So they're faced with replacing school buses, and wouldn't it be nice if they could get someone else to pay for them? And lo and behold, there is a grant available through the DEEP that will that could help Durham buy electric school buses. And so Durham is applying for the grant, not Wallingford. And for a while, I was afraid that maybe Durham was pressuring Wallingford to kick in to that, to the purchase price. But that is not the case. We're going to come back to this, but I also asked Board of Education member Autumn Allenson about this issue and about the location of a possible charging station for Durham if they were able to get electric school buses. So let's hear what Autumn had to say, and we'll come back on that.
That looks good.
So should Wallingford be contributing to the purchase price of these buses? Keep in mind, they're electric buses, very important to a lot of people. What do you think?
So in my opinion, and I'm pretty sure it's been beaten well in our meetings, we don't own the buses, so we're not going to pay for the buses, because why would we pay for something that could be taken away from us when a contract is vacated? Or why would we embed finance within a contract when there's no guarantee how long a contract is? Only a contract, but it can be dissolved, you know? So I think the most important header to take is we are not going to pay for electric buses. We do want to explore the possibility within the realm of the VW grant, but we're not as a town looking to spend money on something we don't own. So where we're at now is we're finding out more information about whether or not there is a piece of town property that could possibly be good for charging stations, because buses wouldn't need to be in there all the time. So it's, again, we're exploring that option, but it's not necessarily a definite. And then we had a few other questions up in the air, but where we're at is they've started to draft their request for the grant. They've landed on 17 buses as being the proposal, and then we've kind of hashed out that we're not willing to pay for anything, but we'll be the school that they can explore it with, or the school system rather, that they can explore it with. And we're going to continue to collaborate on this until we get an answer, yes or no. So I don't think it's going to be a very long drawn out process, because again, it will be either a yes or a no, that it is or is not feasible, and that it is or is not supportable with the current parcels of land that we currently have, or the places we can put charging stations, or the amount of money we get for the buses. So,
The buses.
well, yeah, and we being the partnership between Wallingford Public Schools and Durham School Services. Yeah.
Good. Let's make that the final word. Thanks for bringing us up to date. Appreciate it.
Sure. Anytime.
Bye-bye. So that's the recap. Wallingford's not going to be paying for any school buses.
Right.
Durham may be looking to the town for an available piece of land for a charging station. That doesn't necessarily mean they get it for free. It doesn't answer any of those sort of questions. And in the end, Durham may not get enough money from the grant to make it worth their while.
Right.
Buy these very expensive electric school buses.
Right.
Your thoughts on the whole issue?
People are really hot on the electric technology right now, and I think it's very trendy. I think that the hybrids were really hot like 10 years ago, maybe more than 10 years ago, when the Priuses were flying off the shelves, and now we're on the all electric. I think this is another 10-year phase, and then we're going to get into something better afterwards. But, I think if you're Durham School Services and you have the option to get a bus for free from either the government or from the town of Wallingford, why wouldn't you take it? Right. I mean, it just makes good business sense for them. I think Autumn impresses me. I think she's right on target. Why would we want to get, involved in financing anything for the bus company? Because they may not be our contractor next year.
Yeah. Okay. Let's make that the final word. And thanks for coming on. I want to thank our viewers for watching the Citizen Mike Show. We try to produce these on a Wednesday, up on YouTube Wednesday night or maybe Thursday. Want to thank WPAA TV for broadcasting the Citizen Mike Show on Thursday, Friday, Monday, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays at 9, Saturdays at 10 a.m. And good night, Joe. We'll see you next time around. Okay.
Thanks, Mike. We'll see you next time.